Iran is sending drones to Venezuela for them to use against American aircraft carriers if the US bombs Venezuela. And this is a huge deal. Venezuela said, quote, "We are almost certainly in need of these Iranian drones with a 1,000-kilometer range." But you need to know, as well as this, China is going to be sending military equipment to Venezuela as well, so the US will be in for a big fight. In fact, we now know that just a week ago, the Venezuelan president Maduro actually sent a letter directly to China, although ironically it was intercepted by the US as well. Because of that though, we know what was inside the letter, and Venezuela reportedly, quote, asked China for expanded military cooperation between Venezuela and China. And as well as that, we know why Venezuela asked for this military cooperation with China, and it was to, quote, counter the US military escalation against Venezuela. Now, it's worth knowing that publicly, China and Iran have not responded to Venezuela's letters, although it's very unlikely they would respond to it publicly anyway. However, as Russia already sends loads of military equipment and weapons to Venezuela, it's very likely that Russia's allies will do the same. At a minimum, Iran will sell their drones to Venezuela. And those Iranian Shahed drones are really dangerous. Even Russia uses them for their war against Ukraine. But it's not just Venezuela receiving weapons from the east as well. In fact, Russia is giving Iran their best fighter jets to help Iran fight Israel. This is really a big deal. Yesterday, Iran said they've received the licenses to build the Russian Su-35 fighter jets in case of a war against Israel. And these are actually some of the best fighter jets in the world. For comparison, if Iran had these Russian fighter jets just a few months ago, then Israel wouldn't have been able to carry out their attacks on Iran, which started the 12-day war back in June. But it's also worth knowing that at the same time, Iran also got the licenses to build the Russian Su-30 fighter jets, as well as the Su-35. However, Iran is expected to build over 70 of these Russian Su-35 fighter jets, which is a huge amount. It's basically an entire new air force. And it goes without saying that these fighter jets would not only be capable of defending against an attack, but they would also absolutely be capable of carrying out an attack. And to be fair, that's something that at the moment Iran is not capable of doing, mainly because Iran's fighter jets are really old and they just can't compare to the modern day Israeli F-35s. But if Iran had these modern day Russian Su-35s, then they could put up a pretty strong fight. And you might think, now that there's a ceasefire, Iran won't even need these fighter jets. But I'll be honest with you, it looks like that ceasefire is about to fall. And that's because Israel is about to declare war on Lebanon, and what they just announced will shock you. Today, Israel announced they've gotten intelligence that Iran is rearming Hezbollah in Lebanon, and they're preparing them for a war with Israel. But you need to know, this comes not long after the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel was signed. I will say though, that ceasefire seems like it only applied to Hezbollah, as Israel has been carrying out daily bombings on Lebanon regardless. But it's not only Hezbollah in Lebanon that Israel is talking about here, because Israel says they've discovered new supply routes from Iraq and Syria into Lebanon to rearm Hezbollah. And so because of that, yeah, you guessed it, Israel has threatened to invade Syria and Iraq to stop these supply routes, to stop the rearmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon. I've got to be honest, I find it a little bit ironic that Israel wants to invade two countries to stop the chance of a war with half of a country. Either way, Israel said, quote, foreign intelligence reports suggest that some weapons have already reached Hezbollah through overland routes via Iraq and Syria. And this is Israel confirming they're going to keep bombing Lebanon. So Israel is really preparing for a war with Hezbollah, and they claim Iran is rearming Hezbollah via Iraq and Syria. But on the topic of Syria, it seems like Syria is starting to move closer to Israel and the US and the West anyway. So maybe Israel won't have to go to war. And the reason I say that is for the first time in a decade, the US is coming back into Syria. Today, Syria said, quote, we've signed a declaration with the international coalition to finally defeat ISIS. However, the last time the US tried to do this, over 200,000 people were killed. But you need to know, as well as this, Syria has announced they're going to be reopening their embassy in Washington as well. And this comes after the Syrian president visited the White House early yesterday morning. Syria said, quote, the US will allow us to resume our embassy activities in Washington to strengthen coordination on counter-terrorism, security, and economic issues. But this is really quite a big deal. Before the previous Syrian president Bashar al-Assad was overthrown last year, Syria was actually moving further away from the West. Syria really didn't like the US. They started to work with Russia and get Russia to try and defeat ISIS. And whenever the West tried to do it, Syria really condemned them and tried to kick them out. But the new president who overthrew Bashar al-Assad has started to do the opposite, and he's now starting to work with the West over Russia. And so not only is the Syrian embassy reopening in Washington for the first time in over a decade, but the important part, the US is also likely going to restart their airstrikes on Syria to finally try and defeat ISIS. As I said, the last time the US did that, nearly 200,000 people were killed directly or indirectly. Really quite a big deal. But this isn't going to fix the problems in the Middle East. The reason I say that is Israel today accused Iran of trying to assassinate the Israeli ambassador to Mexico. Yeah, this was really weird. Israel said, quote, we want to thank Mexico for stopping a terrorist attack by Iran that sought to attack Israel's ambassador to Mexico. But Iran responded to this, and they responded really strongly, as you'd expect. However, because this was such an unusual allegation, Iran first said, quote, "We found this allegation so absurd and ridiculous that we did not think it even required an official response." But because of how big this accusation was, for example, if Iran actually did this, it would have been an act of war, Iran did respond to it, and Iran said, quote, "Israel is trying to damage our friendly relations with Mexico through this absurd allegation." So yeah, Iran completely denied having anything to do with it, and they called the allegation completely absurd. But to be fair, Mexico even said that Israel was pretty much lying. Mexico said, quote, "We have no knowledge of a supposed attempt against Israel's ambassador to Mexico." And because Iran considers Mexico somewhat of an ally, Mexico said, quote, "Well, this would betray Mexico's interests, and we consider betraying Mexico's interests to be betraying our own interests." So for whatever reason, Israel has accused Iran of trying to assassinate Israel's ambassador to Mexico, and Iran considers Mexico an ally. The only issue, even Mexico denies it, and to be fair, it makes no sense why Iran would want to carry out an attack on Mexico, especially in Mexico. So this really doesn't add up, but to be fair, it seems like Israel is doing this just to try and increase the tensions with Iran. And I'm not the one that's noticed this. Today, North Korea noticed it. Today, North Korea said that if Israel breaks the ceasefire with Iran, then North Korea will come to support Iran, and they might attack Israel. Yeah, specifically, North Korea said, quote, "We have stood by the Iranian people since the start, and that's not about to end." And North Korea also said the reason why they're prepared to do this. They said, quote, "The West cannot be trusted, and they're always seeking to undermine the sovereignty of independent nations." If you don't know, today the North Korean ambassador met with two really high-level Iranian officials. Now in that meeting, they spoke about a few things, but one of the main things being North Korea's support to Iran. One of those Iranian officials said, quote, "Resistance is the only path to secure the people of Iran. Today, Iran is on the front lines of fighting against Western expansionism, and if we fail, the storm of the West will head eastward, towards North Korea." Now, I'll be honest, it's hard to know exactly what was achieved in these meetings themselves. That's mainly because these countries just don't release much information on their private meetings. But what we do know for sure is that North Korea has promised to support Iran in case Israel ever breaks the ceasefire against Iran. But to be fair, the West at the moment has their own issues. For example, the UK has just started to get really annoyed at Spain, but the reason why is not what you think. If you don't know, Spain has actually banned British military aircraft from being able to fly over Spain. And actually the reason for that is that Spain is still annoyed over Gibraltar, and the UK military aircraft are not allowed to fly over Spain to land at the British military base in Gibraltar. And because of this, British aircraft now have to fly either all the way around France or down through Portugal just to reach RAF Gibraltar, which takes way longer than it should. And I'm going to tell you this as well. This comes at the same time that some members of the Spanish Parliament are talking about trying to take Gibraltar. But there is a reason for that. It's actually probably the UK's fault they're saying that. Recently, the UK gave the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius, and it signalled to a lot of other countries that they might be able to get their hands on British territory as well. For example, I made a video on this, and it got millions of views. Argentina recently threatened to invade the Falkland Islands because they thought they could get them back because Mauritius got the Chagos Islands. I say get them back, they only really had them for about 2 days, but anyway, you get the point. Anyway, the Spanish members of parliament are using this as a reason as to why they might be able to get Gibraltar. But you should know, the UK really hasn't been doing much to resolve this disagreement with Spain over British military aircraft using Spanish airspace. Even today, the UK Defence Secretary was questioned as to what he's doing to try and resolve this disagreement. And as you'd expect from a politician, he kind of pandered around the question. He said, quote, "RAF Gibraltar continues to operate as a sovereign military airfield, and the current ban by Spain does not impede our operational freedom." He didn't answer the question. He was asked, what is the UK doing to fix this issue? I tell you what, I might actually run in the next election in the UK just to be the only bloody politician in there that answers questions directly. Fucking, if you're not fixing something, just admit you're not fixing it. Anyway, after being asked about 6 times to answer the question correctly, he did. And he said, quote, "I meet with Spain regularly to discuss a range of issues, but the recent discussions have not included airspace arrangements." He could have just said that first time. Bit of a tangent, but I'm British, so I can talk about British politics. So the UK is not talking about the important things with Spain. Instead, I guess they're talking about rubbish things. Because this is quite a big deal. Spain is talking about invading Gibraltar and stopping British military planes from being able to fly across their country. The UK really should be trying to fix that. Either way though, you might have realised, I've just covered all the news from the last 24 hours. We call this a daily recap. We do these every day, and most people will do them once a week. Although yesterday, Iran unveiled a missile which can reach the US, and they've actually threatened to use it. So click here to watch that video, and click here to subscribe so that you can see tomorrow's video, where I'll cover the news again, and hopefully you'll learn something again.